Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Today in the rLounge, this mother-in-law's network of burned bridges meant no cushy fallback. Karma, thy name, is foreclosure. Mother-in-law kicked me out of the house, so I secretly sold the house and brought them to the streets. First, let me admit I may be the a-hole for thinking of it this way. Not sure what you guys would have done. Hear me out. My problem is my mother-in-law. She's excessively nosy. She has to have a say in all our matters. Her meddling pisses me off, especially in the financial matters. These days, I feel like I'm competing with my mother-in-law for my wife's attention and care. I, 41 male, have been married to my wife, Mandy, for 7 years. Before mother-in-law entered in our lives, or rather in my house, there were no red flags in our marriage. We were pretty happy and content with our lives. It started going south 2 years back when mother-in-law had a deadly accident. Half of her body was fractured. She had slim chances, but she survived. She could barely sit. Leading a normal life seemed far in sight. After spending a month at the hospital, it was time for discharge. Mandy is a single child. Her dad left her mom when she was a kid. He is non-existent in their lives. Details of him are unrelated, so I'll skip it. Mother-in-law had been living alone until her accident. In this condition, it was impossible for her to survive alone. So Mandy insisted we move mother-in-law with us. Well, I do sympathize with her, but you know having mother-in-law in the house is not a pleasant situation. However, I agreed because they had no other option. We couldn't leave mother-in-law on her own. I modified the guest bedroom to make a comfortable space for mother-in-law. For the first year, she stayed out of our business, mostly because she was confined to her bed. We led our usual life, except that Mandy was really busy taking care of her mother along with her full-time job. We had a nurse for mother-in-law when Mandy was at work. Our couple time reduced significantly because Mandy is always busy and tired of juggling so many responsibilities together. I was supportive of her until her mother's mouth was shut. Honestly, I never wanted my mother-in-law to live in my house. Who does? Seeing the situation, I agreed. I took this to be a temporary arrangement. But oh boy, looks like my mother-in-law is in no mood to leave my house. I mean, she has recovered from her illness. Her fractured bones went back to their places, but this woman doesn't want to go back to hers. She can walk and talk, a lot, but she's still lounging at my house for free. I'm not being mean, guys. Imagine living with a mean mother-in-law for 2 years. Mandy and I both have a full-time job. We barely get time for each other during the week. We look forward to the weekend for our quality time, and that, too, mother-in-law seems to hijack it. She would ask Mandy to drive her to the hospital for a checkup, or maybe a salon, or for shopping. Every weekend she has something or the other lined up for Mandy. Mother-in-law is fit to drive, yet she doesn't. She says the accident has scared her to go behind the wheel. Fair enough. She can take an Uber, right? No, she wants a free ride from Mandy. I protested about it, and Mandy came up with a solution that I join them. Really? Is that really a solution? I feel third-wheeling between the mother and daughter duo. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to it. As soon as mother-in-law started recovering, she began poking her nose at everything. She commented on the aesthetics of the house and even the structure as how certain things were ill-constructed. She even got her room repainted because she was unable to vibe in. Earlier, Mandy used to be annoyed at her mother's snide remarks, but gradually I found her following her mom's instructions. She repainted the room, changed the furniture, and even made Mandy change her wardrobe. I hate it when Mandy follows her mom's instructions like a puppet. I often resist her actions and try to make her understand that she should not give in to her mom's demands. At my face, she seemed convinced, but later I see her doing what her mom told her to do. Upon confrontation, she would just say, "Oh, I changed my mind," or "I realized mom was right, so I did this." These tiny incidents have been piling up inside of me, and last month I burst out at Mandy. I listed down all the incidents that were bothering me. She sobbed and confessed that her mother had been manipulating her. According to Mandy, mother-in-law has been using her accident to manipulate her, saying things like, "Mandy, if I had died in the accident, how lonely your life would have been today. And what if I had another accident and die this time? You'd regret not listening to me, wouldn't you?" Such a crap by mother-in-law. If this is true, then her mother is really toxic. And Mandy is pretty naive to fall for her manipulation. I asked Mandy when mother-in-law would be going back to her place. She was surprised by my question. I don't know what was wrong with that. She blew out. She said that she could not wrap her head that I was anticipating her mother to live on her own after such a frightening accident. I tried to explain that I didn't mean to throw her out, but eventually she should move out, right? Considering the fact that she has gotten back to her former health and she's capable of living on her own. I even suggested that mother-in-law can move closer to our place so that we can reach her immediately in the hours of need. But Mandy stuck to the point that how could I ask her mother to leave after such a terrible accident? I couldn't take it anymore and blurted out, "Your mother had an accident and she has recovered. She's not terminally ill that you cannot part away with her. Mandy stared at me with red blood eyes and said I was wishing terminal illness for her mother. This happened like 2 weeks ago, and she's still mad at me. I've also not apologized this time. I don't think I said anything wrong. We are not on talking terms. We share the bed, but we face the walls and pretend the other one is non-existent. It is becoming very toxic to live in the house. I want to run away. She's mostly spending her time in mother-in-law's room or going out with her. I don't think this is my fault at all, but I do realize that I should have handled this better. I do want the best for mother-in-law, but I certainly don't want her in the house. How do I tackle this problem? First, let's give her some credit. Surviving that accident and managing to fracture half her body? Impressive. But turning your life into a perpetual episode of Mother-in-Law Knows Best? Less so. She's recovered physically, but now she's apparently in rehab for being the world's most demanding house guest. Mandy is a single child, which means she's got the guilt and obligation package deal, and her mother knows exactly how to pull those strings. It's a masterclass in manipulation. The kind of emotional blackmail mother-in-law is dishing out could make even the most hardened telemarketer blush. Mandy, if I had died, classic line. You've suggested reasonable solutions, but Mandy's stuck on this idea that her mother's recovery means a lifetime stay at your place. Acknowledge her feelings, but stand firm on your boundaries. Explain that you're not trying to abandon mother-in-law, just finding a sustainable solution for everybody's sanity. Maybe pitch the idea of mother-in-law living nearby as the compromise of the century. Update 1. A situation has developed in bits and pieces over the last few months, summarizing it for the sake of relevance. Let me start from where I left. A few days after my post, Mandy hugged me while we were sleeping. She apologized to me that she was childish to blow it out of proportion. I wanted to check her stance on shifting mother-in-law to her house, but I held my horses and parked the discussion for later. Didn't want to ruin the moment, you know? She asked me for a date night. I was happy that she was trying to smoothen the relationship. Boy, I was wrong. It was a trap. On a perfect romantic dinner outing, she dropped a bombshell that her mother had sold off her house, and now she would be living with us permanently. I flipped out. She whispered to me to calm down as others were looking at us. I felt trapped. How could I possibly be calm? I mean, how could she decide this without consulting me? This was not a request or demand, but an FYI kind of thing. She just dropped the bombshell and expected me to be okay with it. I didn't care to finish off the dinner and stormed out. She followed me to the car and insisted we talk. I refused to listen. She yelled that she planned the dinner so that we could discuss this matter outside because her mom would be at home. She knew I would freak out and she didn't want her mom to see us this way. I screamed, "Exactly, that is my point. This is going to happen if she lives with us. We cannot have the privacy. Do you want us to spend every evening outside for the rest of our lives because we cannot have the house to ourselves?" She murmured that we would have our room for personal time. I asked her then why she didn't give me this news in the room. She said I would scream and her mother would feel bad. It felt like I was talking to a wall. I asked her to go home by herself because I needed space. She refused to leave the car, so I barged out, hailed a cab, and went to a local bar. I called up my colleague, ranted about my miserable life, and got drunk. When I went home, I saw Mandy sitting with mother-in-law in her room. I went to bed and dozed off. My colleague suggested I have a rational conversation with Mandy. I didn't want to, but still gave it a shot. I asked her why did mother-in-law sell the house and what was their plan for the future. First, she started sobbing. "You treated me so roughly last night. You stormed out of the restaurant and everyone stared at me, which was so embarrassing. Then I had to drive home alone and explain the whole situation to Mom." I asked why she had to tell her mom everything. She said, "Are you nuts? Mom saw us going out together for a date and then I returned alone with teary eyes. Don't you think anyone would ask the reason?" I said, "No, if you draw the boundary, no one would ask." Anyways, coming to the point of why did your mother sell the house? She trolled around the topic for 10 minutes only to conclude that mother-in-law had sold the house to cover her medical bills, and now she has nowhere to go, hence we should be accommodating her in our place. I didn't know what to do. Yelling in anger was not going to help. The fact was mother-in-law had nowhere to go, and I could not just throw her out on the streets. Yes, they did a terrible thing by dumping their decisions on me instead of discussing it, but what options did I have now? So, I let mother-in-law live in my house, but I told Mandy to take this as a temporary arrangement until we figure out a place for her. I also set up some ground rules that mother-in-law would not interfere in our lives, and we shall not include her in any decision-making of our house. Mandy nodded. It went smooth for a month until mother-in-law again started putting her foot in our business. She would comment on our eating habits, living habits, and even my spending habits. She compared me with Mandy's dad, who brought lilies for mother-in-law every Friday. She says I don't spend enough on Mandy. I admit I'm not the best in showcasing my feelings, but this doesn't mean I don't love my wife. Mandy, on the other hand, got influenced by her mother, and we ended up fighting. It is becoming very difficult to put up with mother-in-law now. I don't see any other situation than asking her to leave. I'm clueless. What would you guys have done in my situation? Mother-in-law sold the house to cover medical bills and now has nowhere to go. Convenient. You're stuck between a rock and a nosy place. Sure, you can't throw her out on the streets, but letting her stay should come with a non-negotiable end date and a contract. Setting ground rules was a valiant effort. No interference, no decision-making. Sounds perfect in theory. But mother-in-law's got the persistence of a telemarketer at dinner time. Comparing you to Mandy's dad who bought lilies every Friday? Ouch. I bet he also never had to deal with mother-in-law moving in permanently. So what's the play here? Asking mother-in-law to leave seems like the only viable option. Frame it as a compassionate push towards independence. Maybe set her up with a lovely apartment nearby. It's time for some tough love and boundary setting. Update 2. Sorry, couldn't update earlier because of ongoing court cases. Now that everything is over, updating it to give closure to everyone who has been asking for one. This is going to be a long update. Grab your coffee. Mother-in-law continued to make my life hell. She was getting on to my nerves until I called it off. It was on my 8th anniversary last month. I got a beautiful dress for Mandy, which I wanted her to wear for the surprise dinner. Mother-in-law saw the gift and called me a tightwad for getting a normal gift on her anniversary. I didn't want to spoil our evening, so I ignored her and went inside my room. I asked Mandy to get ready, as I had a surprise plan for her, but she was sulking in the corner over the gift. I assured her that I had planned a beautiful evening for her, which would give her a better experience than a superficial gift. No matter how hard I tried, Mandy did not budge. She was mad at me for not taking her on vacation. She insisted that at least I should have bought her a diamond. Meanwhile, I was getting a continuous call from the restaurant. I had booked the rooftop arena and it got decorated with flowers and candles. She ruined everything. I lost my crap. She did not appreciate my gestures and was stuck to her demands of having an expensive gift. I told her if she needed diamonds for her anniversary, she should have told me in prior. I could have gotten something instead of wasting so much money preparing a romantic gateway. She could not expect me to read her mind. The Mandy I knew was not materialistic. I'm sure her mother had planted the virus in her mind. The restaurant manager made a final call before they scrapped the decorations, but Mandy still was not ready to go, so I had to cancel the booking. I did not get any refund as per their policy. I lost my mind and yelled at Mandy for getting manipulated by her mother. Yes, in the moment of rage, I called her Piggy. She also called me derogatory names, but she's not owning her mistakes. Our fight got so much heated that I could not take it anymore. I stormed out of the house and spent the night at my friend's. I got the shocker of my life when I came back home the next afternoon. I could not access the door with my keys. My house lock was changed. I banged the door in anger only to see my mother-in-law screaming out from the window and yelling, "How dare you call my daughter Piggy? You're a cheapskate. You can't even buy flowers for my doll. You're no longer allowed in this house until you apologize and bring her what she deserves, diamond jewelry." I was shocked at her demand. I felt like a ransom for having my house back. Apology and diamond my butt. I asked where's Mandy. Mother-in-law said she was at work. The naive me drove to her workplace and asked if she knew all about this. Indeed, she was hands in gloves with her mother in this. She said, "I was a fool until now to not demand anything from you. Glad my mother came into my life and taught me how to deal with a pinch penny like you. Now you have to get me a diamond pendant to get inside the house. Until then, you live on the streets." I showed her my middle finger and left the place. I called up my dad and narrated him the details. He asked me to visit home and he could find a solution. I was not ready to give in. I was done with Mandy. If she's going to follow her mom, she would have to follow her outside the house. Meanwhile, Dad scouted a lawyer. He asked me what did I want and I said, divorce. He said he would start the paperwork and asked me to think about the divorce terms because my witch mother-in-law would try to rip me off every penny. The next day I got a text from Mandy that my stuff was packed and kept on the front porch. Apparently, her house didn't have the space for my trash. I picked up my stuff and left the place with tears welling up in my eyes. I pledged to avenge my humiliation. I told my lawyer to hold on the divorce proceedings for a while because I wanted to snatch the roof off their head. I secretly put up my house for sale. I have spent more than a decade in that house. I had sufficient pictures of it for any buyer to make a decision. However, my lawyer knew someone who was hunting for a house, so it was the best deal possible. I told the buyer about my current situation in full transparency. He understood me. He recently had a divorce and lost his house to his cheating wife, so it came to a full circle. I offered him a discount on the market price. A loss of a few grand was worth the panic of my soon-to-be ex-wife and mother-in-law's face. I sold my house and took the payment into my father's bank account. In this way, I had zero assets during my divorce. After all the paperwork was done, I went with my lawyer to the new owner. It was Sunday. Ex-wife and ex-mother-in-law both were at home. I rammed on the doorbell. Mother-in-law peeped through the window and opened the door, cussing on top of her voice. She thought I came with my friends to create trouble. I said, "Trouble, yes, but not the kind you're thinking." The sheriff was late by a few minutes. My lawyer introduced himself. Mandy rushed out of her room and asked who were they. I introduced to them the new owner of the house. Their faces turned pale. It took them a few minutes to get the hang of the situation. Mother-in-law yelled that I can't sell the house without Mandy's approval. I said it looks like I can and have. The house deed had only my name because it is my house. Mandy has no claim in it because I bought it before getting married. It was so satisfying to see them in panic, blabbering and running here and there, calling their friends and relatives to confirm if this was legal. Meanwhile, the sheriff arrived and dropped the deadliest bombshell. Mandy got served. She was broken. She slumped on the couch. She held my hands and started crying. I shrugged her off. Her mother tried to hug her, but Mandy pushed her away and screamed that it was all her fault. Mother-in-law was embarrassed and speechless. Mandy begged me for a private conversation, and I obliged. She pleaded with me not to divorce. She said she had never cheated on me and that she didn't deserve this treatment. I repeated her sentence that I too never cheated on her, loved and cared for her, and even took her mom into my house. I too didn't deserve what she did to me, so this divorce would make things even for us. She cried that they had nowhere to go if I kicked them out. I asked her if she cared where I went when she and her mother locked me out of the house. No, right? But I do care for them. That's why I gave them 15 days' notice to vacate the house. I was not legally bound to give them the notice. Their names are not there in any legal documents of the house. The property tax is paid by me. The house belongs to me, and I could easily book them as squatters and kick them out when they locked me out, but I wanted a cold revenge. They were not ready to vacate the house even after 15 days' notice had passed. It was only when the new owner called the cops did they pack their stuff and left. He ensured that they packed only their clothes and belongings and not to take extra things from the house because I sold the house along with the furniture and other stuff. All was bought by me. After being forced to vacate the house, they were living in a motel. Ex-mother-in-law was not on good terms with any of her relatives to ask them for a favor. Who would give them in their house after knowing about this situation? During the divorce proceedings, Mandy demanded 50% of my assets, but sadly, I had no assets. My lawyer claimed that the house was gifted to me by my dad, and I gave him back the money after selling it off. So, no claim there. She is a working woman, so the monthly maintenance was ruled out because of our lower salary difference. So, she gets almost nothing out of this divorce, quite contrary to what her mother had been planning. Mandy blew up my phone for the initial few weeks with pleadings and apologies. She begged for another chance and promised to cut off all ties with her mother. Too late, Mandy. The ship has sailed now. I know some of you might say I made an impulsive decision. Trust me, this was the most thoughtful decision I ever made. Ex-mother-in-law had made my life hell, and Mandy was gradually turning into her mother. There was no foreseeable solution to getting rid of ex-mother-in-law without losing Mandy. And why would I want her? She got manipulated by her mother, mistreated and humiliated me, and threw me out of my own house. I lost all love and respect for her, so what's the point of remaining in the marriage? I don't know what the future holds for me, but I sure cannot let anyone use me just for the sake of love or marriage. This situation has made me bitter. I hope to come out of it soon and start my life fresh. I'll keep you updated, but that's it for now. Thanks for reading. Sorry for the long rant. Mandy's pathetic attempts to patch things up, only to be met with your cold shoulder, served as the pathetic poetic justice. Her demands for half of your assets falling flat because you cleverly shielded them? Chef's kiss. Sure, some might say you acted impulsively, but after mother-in-law and Mandy's combined efforts to make your life a living hell, your revenge was a dish best served cold, garnished with eviction papers. Now you're a free man, albeit a bitter one, but hey, you've walked through a fire and come out on the other side. Hopefully the next chapter of your life will be less Game of Thrones and more Finding Nemo. Here's to starting fresh, with a much-needed break from any and all mother-in-law related drama. Cheers to you, OP. What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon. And put your chair back where you found it.